Hey there, pirates. Welcome aboard the Anime No Me channel. Why did Dragon and Garp abandon Luffy? This is a question that has intrigued One Piece fans for a long time. After all, how could the world's most wanted man and a legendary marine hero justify leaving a boy like Luffy alone on Dawn Island? There seem to be deep reasons connected to Luffy's fate that explain why Dragon and Garp made these seemingly contradictory decisions. Perhaps, in their own ways, both wanted to protect Luffy, not only from the world, but also from their own dangerous existences. I hope for your support to help our crew win, and to do so, you just need to click the thumbs up button, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you will win an incredible devil fruit, so just comment which fruit you want. Dragon, as the leader of the revolutionaries, had everything to lose if he were identified as Luffy's father. Since his introduction in Chapter 432, Dragon has been seen as a global threat. His presence in Logtown in Chapter 100, saving Luffy from Captain Smoker, was an act that demonstrated a bond between father and son, even from a distance. However, considering the context, it seems that Dragon believed he couldn't protect Luffy without putting him in extreme danger. Being Dragon's son meant having a target on one's back from the moment that connection was discovered. Moreover, Dragon led a revolution against the world government, facing dangers at every step. He not only challenged the authorities, but also the very principles that uphold the regime. Luffy, as a vulnerable child, would be Dragon's weakest point. Imagine if the government forces discovered this connection. The world government wouldn't hesitate to use Luffy as a weapon or bargaining chip against Dragon. Knowing this, Dragon likely decided to keep his distance, entrusting Luffy to his grandfather. This decision may not have been easy, but perhaps Dragon believed that this was the only way to give Luffy a chance to live freely. On the other hand, Garp, despite being a marine hero, was also in a complicated position. As someone who served directly under the world government, Garp had to balance his reputation and obligations with his loyalty to his family. In Chapter 431, he reveals that he left Luffy in the care of Dadan, justifying that the boy needed to be raised to be strong. However, there may be a more hidden reason behind this choice. Garp knew that his closeness to Luffy could expose the family connection with Dragon. To protect Luffy's identity, perhaps Garp chose to maintain a distant relationship, visiting him sporadically to avoid raising suspicion. I think Garp also had another reason for distancing himself. He respected Luffy's freedom. From the beginning, Garp never tried to force Luffy to follow a specific path, despite his desire for him to become a marine. In Chapter 485, Garp shows that he understood his grandson's free-spirited nature, even when lamenting their choices. Perhaps by letting Luffy grow away from his direct influence, Garp was allowing him to choose his own destiny. Another important aspect is the nature of Luffy's destiny. Since Chapter 1044, we know that the Gomu Gomu no Mi is actually the Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika. This positions Luffy as the sun god Nika, someone destined to bring freedom to the world. If there were prophecies or stories about the next Nika, it's possible that Dragon and Garp were aware of them. Both may have believed that Luffy's role in the future couldn't be shaped by them, but rather discovered by him. It's interesting to think that the absence of Dragon and Garp may have directly contributed to Luffy's independence. He grew up in Fuchsia Village, surrounded by figures like Shanks, who taught him the importance of being free and the strength of following his dreams. In Chapter 1, Shanks sacrifices his arm to save Luffy, and later gives him his straw hat as a symbol of faith in the boy's future. Perhaps by entrusting Luffy to this environment, Dragon and Garp knew he would be in good hands, as this was important to the story of One Piece. The absence of Dragon and Garp in Luffy's upbringing not only shaped the journey of the future Pirate King, but was also crucial for him to develop his own worldview. It's curious to imagine how Luffy's destiny would have been different if he had grown up under the shadow of a revolutionary father or a marine hero grandfather. But perhaps, precisely because he wasn't directly influenced by them, Luffy was able to chart a unique path and become the symbol of freedom the world so desperately needed. This doesn't mean that their absence was irrelevant. On the contrary, their absence is just as important as the prominent figures Luffy had in his childhood. From the beginning of his journey in One Piece, Luffy has demonstrated an unwavering spirit and a worldview that is simple but deeply powerful. He values freedom above all else. This ideal was not imposed by Dragon or Garp. It was something he built on his own. Growing up in a Fuchsia village, Luffy had contact with ordinary people, such as the villagers and, of course, the red-haired pirates. Shanks, in particular, played a crucial role in teaching Luffy the value of freedom and camaraderie. In Chapter 1, Shanks sacrifices his arm to save Luffy, showing that protecting others is more important than pride or brute strength. This moment, more than any lesson Dragon or Garp could have taught, planted the seed of what Luffy would become. If Dragon had been present in Luffy's life, his upbringing would inevitably have been marked by revolutionary ideals. As the leader of the revolutionaries, Dragon dedicated his life to challenging the world government, fighting for the freedom of oppressed nations. It's possible he wanted Luffy to follow in his footsteps, but this could have have limited Luffy's worldview, shaping him within the confines of a specific ideology. I think Dragon knew this, and perhaps chose to distance himself so that Luffy could discover for himself what freedom meant to him. Garp, on the other hand, had a very different goal. As a Marine hero, he repeatedly tried to convince Luffy and Ace to become Marines. In Chapter 551, during the Marineford War, Garp makes it clear how much he valued justice and order, even if it meant confronting his own grandsons. But Garp also understood that Luffy had an indomitable spirit. He knew that forcing Luffy to follow the Marine path would be useless and perhaps even harmful. By allowing Luffy to be raised away from his influence, Garp gave him the chance to choose his own destiny. Luffy is a simple person, but his perspective on the world has always been shaped by his experiences and the people he's surrounded by. His view of pirates as symbols of freedom and adventure was largely born from his time with Shanks and his crew in Fuchsia Village. Shanks was the model pirate that Luffy idealized. Someone who, despite having all the power and skill, preferred to laugh and live freely while protecting his friends and maintaining his loyalty. But what if Luffy had grown up with a different view? What if he had learned more about Garp's heroic past, especially his legendary battle against Roxy Zebek, and seen the Navy as the true protectors of the world? Perhaps his opinion could have changed. I think it's important to remember that Luffy has an open mind, and despite his stubbornness, he has always been able to recognize the value of different perspectives. For example, in the Water 7 and Enies Lobby arcs, we saw how Luffy was confronted with the corruption and extremes of the world government, but also how he respects those who fight for true justice, like Smoker and earlier Aokiji. These moments show that even as a pirate, Luffy doesn't necessarily despise all Marines. If he had grown up hearing stories about Garp as the Navy hero who fought against Zebek alongside Gold D. Roger, maybe he would have developed even greater respect for his grandfather, and who knows, maybe even questioned his own view on what it means to be free. The battle against Roxy Zebek, mentioned in Chapter 957, is one of the most important moments in the history of One Piece. It was an event that shaped the current world, where Garp and Roger, natural enemies, teamed up to defeat one of the greatest threats of their time. I think that if Luffy had grown up knowing about this feat, he might have seen Garp in a completely different light. For Luffy, Garp is just the persistent grandfather who made him train hard and occasionally showed up to complicate his life. But the truth is that Garp is much more than that. He is a man who, with his strength and determination, helped save the world at a crucial moment. Knowing this could have planted a seed of doubt in Luffy's mind about his choice to be a pirate. Moreover, if Garp had shared more of his stories and shown Luffy the heroic side of the Navy, it's possible that Luffy might have seen Marines differently. After all, Garp always wanted Luffy to follow in his footsteps and become a Marine. In Chapter 432, Garp expresses his frustration upon seeing that Luffy chose the path of a pirate despite all his efforts to steer him toward justice. If, instead of just forcing Luffy to train, Garp had told him about the sacrifices and achievements of the Navy, maybe Luffy would have been influenced to consider that path. Luffy grew up hearing about Gold D. Roger as a legend, but never as a real person with flaws and virtues. He idolizes Roger for the title of Pirate King and for the freedom that title symbolizes, but he doesn't know much about the complexity of the man behind the legend. Similarly, Luffy didn't have a complete understanding of what it means to be a pirate or a Marine as a child. He knows Shanks as the perfect example of a pirate and Garp as the opposite example, but he never stopped to think about the nuances between these two extremes. I think that if he had heard more about Garp's heroic actions and those of the Marines, especially the fight against Zebek, he might have started to question his idealized view of pirates. It's also possible that if Luffy had known Marines like Smoker or Fujitora in his childhood, he might have had a different view of what it means to be a hero. Smoker, in particular, is a character who represents an alternative view of justice. He isn't blind to the system's flaws, but still believes in the Navy's role as the protector of the people. If Luffy had been exposed to this perspective early on, it's possible that he would have had a more balanced understanding of the world and perhaps even considered that being a Marine could be a way to seek freedom and justice. The impact of this freedom on Luffy's development is evident throughout his journey. Unlike Dragon and Garp, who are deeply rooted in opposing systems, one as a revolutionary and the other as a Marine, Luffy completely rejects these labels. He isn't bound by ideologies or obligations. His only motivation is to follow his dreams and protect those he loves. This simplicity, which may seem like naivety to some, is actually the foundation of his strength. In Chapter 507, when confronted by Rayleigh about the meaning of freedom, Luffy says that he doesn't care what One Piece really is. For him, the adventure and journey to get there are what matter. Moreover, growing up without the direct influence of Dragon and Garp allowed Luffy to form genuine bonds with those around him. He doesn't carry the weight of expectations of being Dragon's son or Garp's grandson. To his friends and allies, Luffy is just Luffy, a young man who laughs loudly, eats too much, and never gives up on his dreams. These bonds are an essential part of his strength, as we saw in the Enies Lobby arc, when the whole crew comes together to declare war on the world government in Robin's name. That moment in chapter 398 shows that Luffy isn't just a leader, but also a friend who inspires absolute loyalty. I think another important point is that the absence of Dragon and Garp allowed Luffy to develop his own sense of morality. While Dragon fights for the freedom of all and Garp believes in the Navy's justice, Luffy acts based on what he feels is right, without worrying about political or social implications. In chapter 194, during the Alabasta arc, he confronts Vivi about her hesitation to fight, saying that sometimes it's necessary to raise your fist to protect what matters. This sense of justice, completely disconnected from systems or ideologies, is something unique to Luffy. I think the absence of Dragon and Garp was just as important as any lesson they could have taught. Luffy grew up without carrying the weight of their identities, allowing him to create his own worldview. He learned the value of freedom, friendship, and justice in a unique way without being tied to ideologies or systems. This independence is what makes him able to inspire those around him and face the greatest challenges with a smile on his face. And perhaps Dragon and Garp always knew this. After all, sometimes the best way to protect someone is to let them be free to find their own way. That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.